You're listening to Hot Cup of Code, the podcast where two Black women in tech brew up conversations about code, career, and culture.
We're talking about breaking barriers, breaking code, and everything in between.
From debugging your first app to navigating big tech, we're here to percolate ideas and stir up inspiration.
So grab your favorite mug, get cozy, and let's dive into the blend of tech and culture. Welcome back to the Hot Cup of Code podcast. I'm Kat.
And I'm Zea.
We are so excited to have you here for our second episode. But first, we want to thank you all so much for all of the love and support on our first episode.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our friends that have listened to us and given us some positive feedback. And thank you to everyone that we don't know yet who's tuned in to listen.
I think the sweetest thing that someone told us was that listening to the podcast feels like what it's like having coffee with us, just sitting and chatting. And that is the biggest compliment. That's exactly what our goal is. So we just hope that this can feel more like a fun chat with friends than anything.
Absolutely.
Zea, tell me, what are you sipping on today?
So today I just have a home classic, a cafe au lait. I'm using Medaglia d'Oro, Italian-style dark roast coffee. This is my second cup of coffee today because it's a heavy study day and I needed it. That's out of character for me. I usually am a one and done kind of gal, but yeah. I needed the extra boost.
Honestly, I am also on my second cup of coffee.
Oh my gosh.
Believe it or not, I am drinking Kirkland roast coffee. I can't remember if it's medium roast or dark roast, but I'm trying to use up some beans that I bought to make cold brew. And I don't know how long I thought in the year I was going to be drinking cold brew, but it is too cold for that. So all this coffee is getting brewed into hot coffee. So my first cup of coffee I had, I forget the name, but it was from a coffee advent calendar. And I'm drinking those Kirkland beans. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I'm also on my second cup of coffee, which I can't even believe either. But here we are.
Well, with all that said, we wanted to chat with you guys about what to expect from the podcast. So Kat and I were so eager to get our thoughts out about Afrotech, which was really what inspired our idea to start a podcast, but this is not a conference review podcast.
No, it's sure not.
Yeah, so we just wanted to have an episode just to go over what our intentions are and what to expect.
Yeah, I think, like I said, this was really inspired by the conversations that we have in real life and the conversations that Zea and I have when we talk about tech. So we want it to feel like that. And part of that is that we have high-level technical conversations, but in a very, normal way.
Like conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Like we don't talk about tech like we are robots. We are certainly not. And I think that we do have very relatable technical conversations. And we want that to be present in the podcast. We want the podcast to be a space for those technical concepts in a conversational manner.
Yeah. And I think beyond the technical conversations, a lot of times when we are co-working or body doubling, we're also just venting to each other, talking career, sharing ideas about different approaches to interviewing, networking. So yeah, I think it's just about having that community and that space, just talk tech with one of your friends while you're working and sipping on some coffee.
Totally. And I think it can be very vulnerable to have some more technical conversations or talk about technical concepts at the conversational level. So the one caveat that I'll give is if you want textbook definitions, those are in the books, baby.
That's in the documentation.
But we are here. And there's so much of that to read, right? Yeah. That would probably not be fun for a podcast. So what I will say is definitely give us grace as we are breaking down some of these more technical concepts because we want it to feel approachable and conversational. And we want to add to the technical concepts in a way that you can't find online on the internet in documentation, etc. So it will probably be a little bit more casual and we're obviously always going to be open to feedback about what that looks like.
Yeah, of course. And I think sometimes it's about who's delivering the information. So this
Mhm.
is also about visibility. I
Mhm.
think that Kat and I have always sought out information, technical information from people that look like us or that share
Yeah.
a background so that we can understand what is being taught to us. So we want to make sure that we are being visible for others and also highlighting some of the other awesome people that we know in tech and sharing their stories. On that note, let's start with ours.
Yeah, right. It would be so wrong for us to say this is a place for visibility, but we will not give any of our own.
Right. All right, that's it. End the podcast.
Yeah, bye. We both came from a coding bootcamp background. We are both career transitioners. And I think
Mhm.
that it would be a real loss for us to talk about our experiences in tech, our experiences as Black women in tech, without at least having a little bit of a conversation about what that period of transition looks like when how we came to tech.
Right. So Kat and I both came into tech through a programming boot camp. We went through a program called Resilient Coders. Shout out to RC.
Shout out. Oh.
And what's really special about RC is that it is a community of people that look
Mhm.
like us. So it's a community where majority of the people in it are Black and brown software
Mhm.
engineers. And so that's very, very special to be taught by people that look like us and then to be able to continue in that community as we progress through our careers. Before we get into a little bit of our background, maybe some quick fire questions. So Kat, before you even joined RC or had your career in tech, what was your level of interest? Did you actually want to be in tech before
It
getting into
was
this?
0. I certainly enjoy the use of tech. And
Okay,
at that
okay.
time, that was my relationship to tech was I like scrolling on the little apps, and that was about it. If you'd asked me even 6 months before I did RC if I could have seen myself transitioning into tech or even doing a boot camp, I would have definitely said no. And I would explain what changed for me. But yeah, I had a little bit of experience making some really small websites for fun with friends in college. And a lot of time passed between then and then my eventual transition in 2021. What about you, Z? What was your interest level before you joined RC, before you started the boot camp?
Yeah, so my interest level was pretty high. Oddly enough, I come from a military background and I was a medic in the Army, but I always had an interest in tech. My pathway just didn't take me through the college route,
Yeah.
but I always wanted to be in tech. And eventually, I was trying to figure out a way to find myself into the college pathway, but then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of free time, lots of interest in tech. I've gone on a little bit about what I did before tech. What was your role, Kat, before getting into tech?
It could not have been more different, A, than my eventual transition into software engineering, or B, than your experience in the military. Before I joined RC, I actually worked in management and in hospitality. So I worked for a brief period during the pandemic as a restaurant manager and also as an operations manager for a large restaurant group in Boston. I had actually had a career of about 10 years in hospitality before I even considered tech as a future career for myself. And pretty much any
Hmm.
job you've ever heard of in a restaurant, I've done it at one point or another. And I really worked my way through restaurants, hospitality, fine dining, anything, below that casual. I actually studied wine for a while as well. Restaurant management really was my first experience in people management, which I really felt like I had a
Okay.
knack for and a skill for. But that for me changed so much during the pandemic. Everything that I loved and enjoyed about restaurants felt like it looked so different. And I was so burnt out because I just felt like the thing I was
Yeah.
passionate about just didn't even have that joy and that light for me anymore. And I was just so eager to do anything else. What about you, Z?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. For me, after the military, on the civilian side, I did work for the VA doing medical
Oh, cool.
administration. And during the pandemic, I was furloughed. So
Mm,
I definitely was already getting kind of burnt out with my job either way. And I wasn't really seeing like the pathway
mhm.
forward. But I didn't really have a choice because for me, work stopped.
Yeah.
So what was I going to do at that time? I had to do something. And so, yeah, it was just like, okay, it's time to do this learning to code thing. So I tried to start learning on my own. That didn't go so well until I found RC. So for me, I did try to learn on my own. I did like the CS50 route.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, wow, cool.
I started off with the CS50. I think I made it through like one or two
Yeah.
lessons, and I was like, I don't know if this is. I don't know if this is for me.
Yeah.
So I tried with that preparation and then went into RC. What did prepping for your coding boot camp look like for you?
Oh my gosh, it was so fast. Like, I honestly think that me applying for the coding boot camp and then me doing it, I think it was like 2 months. It was maybe even less than that. The opportunity kind of fell into my lap. And for perspective, I went from sort of working in operations, working on more of the insurance, hiring, ordering side of a restaurant to working a takeout window, slinging pizzas. And I would never, ever knock that. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
it was a formative experience, but when the world around you is completely uncertain, it was like really hard to keep pushing myself through that. And, we ended up bringing all of the staff back and we're hiring, training, we're measuring tables, physically moving them,
Oh,
like
that's a lot.
even like creating safety protocols. So I didn't have a lot of free time to really prepare, to really study. I did do some learning on free code camp
Mm-hmm.
to prepare myself for the hackathon that was a part of the group interview to do resilient coders. And I feel like free code camp is such a great resource. But I was working long, long hours every week. And pretty much all I had time to do was save my money because I had actually left my job and left that career. I don't know if the folks I work for would say it, but I felt like, man, I'm really burning a bridge. I'm really leaving at a pinnacle part of what could be like a real springboard in my career to
Right.
do something completely different. It was a real risk. And my priority was I need to save my money so that I can commit to
Mm-hmm.
learning in this boot camp. And I really only had enough time to study like basic HTML, basic CSS, and not more than that. What about you, Z? What was your preparation like aside from CS50? Was there any like additional like plans that you made when you did the boot camp?
That's interesting because I did go through the program a little bit earlier than you. So I was a little bit earlier on in the pandemic, and the world had pretty much stopped at that point. So for me, there wasn't really much prep that I could do because I already was in like a standstill and I already had the things in place, like living off of my savings and things like that. So I just kind of transitioned
Yeah,
into doing that
yeah,
every day instead of doing like my 9 to 5
for
job.
sure.
So yeah, I think overall we know that learning to
Yeah,
code in 20
yeah,
weeks is very, very, very
yeah.
difficult. What do you think was like the secret sauce for making it through that experience? So I think for me, finding the right place to learn, because like I
Mm,
said, like going through CS50, I said, nope, this is not for me. I don't know what's going on. What is a pie charm? And then and then going into RC, I think that, yeah, same brain, same
yeah,
girl. Things were clicking because of the community, the instructor,
yeah.
like all of these things kind of were the right fit in the right environment for me to learn. So, yeah, what was the secret sauce for you getting through coding boot camp?
Well, outside of fear, like, oh my God, I just left my job. This has to work.
Oh, that's a
That
huge
was the
motivator.
huge motivator. I was like, what have I done? I need to make this work. But outside of that, for me, community was the secret sauce, right? I came to RC, I came to know about RC through my community. And that's definitely something that I'll share more about in the future. I mean, Z and I could go so far into our personal experiences at every level.
Yeah.
But it was also the community of RC, right? It was a community that made me feel
Hmm.
empowered. It was a group of people that didn't make me feel stupid or out of place for being a complete beginner. Really, the philosophy of resilient coders. And I think a lot of this is a part of our personal mission is that you don't have to earn help or earn
Yes.
resources. You don't have to prove that you are deserving of someone supporting your learning. And that type of
Yeah.
community really helped me to thrive. And it was really, for me, what helped me to be successful. And I will definitely talk more about resilient coders. It will probably come up in a lot of our episodes because it's a huge part of our experience. It's also how we became initially connected. And for a lot of people know this already, but for anyone that doesn't know, after Resilient Coders, actually Zia and I were coworkers. We didn't work on the same team, but we worked at a very large company that you would recognize together. And who knows, maybe one day we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. But yeah, community, such a huge part of my journey as
For sure,
well. So
yeah.
yeah, definitely the secret sauce. Honestly,
Yeah.
Kat, I think that we could probably just like go into a whole like community
Do you want
topic. So
to?
let's like get
Okay,
into
okay,
it.
let's do
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Okay, okay.
Let's do it.
So yeah, I think like community is so important in
Mhm.
tech. We can see that tech has its own space,
Yeah.
right? So when we're thinking about traditional tech,
Mhm.
it's like the typical like Silicon
Mhm.
Valley, it's like nerdy people, largely white guys. Yeah, and it exists. You can go into tech Twitter, and that's like a space where technologists gather. So the community
Yeah.
exists, but it does have a traditional and stereotypical face.
Very West Coast, very quarters at best.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's maybe not inherently inclusive, you know?
Yeah.
So what does that mean? It can mean that these spaces aren't trying to exclude anyone that doesn't fit that aesthetic
Mhm.
or background, but when that space doesn't have other people in mind or other people representing it, it can be exclusive,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And I think that we have sort of both felt like, okay, we're also taking this like career
Mhm.
transition, this different pathway into it, but also like, where's my people at? you
Yeah,
know?
and it's so interesting because at least for me, and I won't speak for your experience, but for me, I feel like I started my experience in tech seeing me, my experience, and people like me all around. And then seeing the wider world of tech, it does not look like what Resilient Coders look like, looks like what the
Right.
community that we came from looks like. I don't know how you feel about it.
I think coming from a military background, I'm maybe a little bit more used to being maybe the only
Oh, that's a good
woman
point.
or one of very few
Yeah.
women in a certain
Yeah.
space. But RC definitely sort of primed me to feel like, oh, like another Black software engineer or another woman software engineer is going to be right at arm's length. And that's not necessarily true. And just to share an anecdote, Kat and I were helping prep or hype up one of our community members for an interview that they had coming
Yeah.
up. And they didn't really need any prepping. It was just, like that hype up
Yeah, for
moment.
sure.
And Kat said something that was really
Oh,
impactful to me. And
oh,
I don't know
that's
if
so
you could
sweet.
paraphrase
I
it.
can, yeah. I don't think that the wider world of tech is designed to be exclusive at all. There are certainly pockets that are like that. But I think as a whole, I think that
Yeah.
the tech community, the aim is to be inclusive. But we are subject to all of the systems that affect our society. And so if you are not actively creating space and making space to be inclusive, making space for identities that are not like yours, you're subject to the same systems that everyone else is out in the world, right? And this is
Right,
not to
right.
knock any specific people. We've had lots of mentorship from lots of different types of people, and some of those people look very traditional to the tech world, and that does not mean they have been any less helpful for us in our skills.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's sometimes very difficult. You almost internalize it when you don't have any place else to turn
Yeah.
to. So when I'm sitting alone at my computer and
Mhm.
I am feeling like I can't get this, I don't understand this, who else is there telling me that you got this? You know what you're doing. And I am very fortunate because I do have people in my space, in my community that are giving me that encouragement and that
Mhm.
reinforcement. However, even sometimes, even though I know that I have that support, sometimes when I'm alone, I am feeling that. But I don't think that is an uncommon feeling. But this person that we happen to be talking to is very early in their career. And so they were kind of feeling that imposter syndrome a little bit more acutely. And that's why I thought what you were saying to them was so impactful. So
so I'll share. I said, you are in a space that's not designed for you. You are not an imposter. Saying that you're an imposter is almost like saying that you belong there, but you don't have the skills. You can't be an imposter in a space that was not designed for you. And that's not a criticism of tech. That's not a criticism of the field of software engineering in general. It's just that so much of this world was not made with us in mind, whether that's as Black women, whether that's as boot camp graduates, whether that is as folks without a computer science degree, that being a software engineer with those specific mix of things means that we're a really small demographic, and that's okay. But you are not a person that could or should be expected to exist and operate the way that the folks that you see around do, because you are not those people.
Right, exactly. I think having spaces or communities like RC, super valuable. But what happens when you get on the job, right? So I know that when I am having those doubts, I can always count on you, or I can count on any of my other software engineering friends or the RC community. But what happens when I'm just on the job with my team and I don't feel like I can connect with them, and I don't have that opportunity to be a little bit vulnerable because I'm having a harder time connecting with those people? So technical skill aside, a lot of what contributes to imposter syndrome is not having that sense of community in the workspace. So I can share what that kind of could look like for me.
Yeah, for sure.
Just one barrier could be, I think that people with tech backgrounds have some similar hobbies sometimes.
Yes, there are common themes. I think that's okay to say. I don't think that's generalizing too much.
Yeah, it's not generalizing too much, but like gaming, for example, I love gaming, but I don't look like a typical gamer. And so I think creating that barrier could be, okay, my entire team is talking about gaming and they're not even including me in that conversation because the expectation is that I don't share that interest. And so that can be a barrier, because then now I have to, interject and say, well, what about me? I like this too. And then you get that kind of look like, really? So I think that can be a barrier.
You have to almost push to feel included, or you have to push yourself into community with these folks. And it's not because they wouldn't have welcomed you. It's because they just didn't consider you. And that's really hard.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I can actually relate to that a lot, because I definitely have some more traditional tech hobbies, but like one of my favorite hobbies is watching like very bad reality TV. If it is terrible and overly produced, I'm watching. And like, I love The Housewives. So it would feel hard sometimes to come into work and, my coworkers would be talking about gaming or something that it seemed like there was a lot of sort of common interests. And I was doing a Housewives marathon over the weekend, and I think I got judgment for it, but it definitely made me feel like I was standing out in a way that, because I already felt so different, didn't feel great. And mind you, I had an amazing team, a very diverse team. I had an awesome manager, an awesome mentor, a ton of fantastic support. And it just goes to show that even with the recipe for all of the inclusion that you could imagine, there are always going to be these moments where you just feel a little other and it's not comfortable.
Yeah, I think really what it boils down to is that it's very, very hard to feel different from the people around you. And in tech, if you are not certain stereotype that exists right out the gate. And then on top of that, tech is just hard, right? Software engineering is hard. So I do think that overall, software engineers and technologists, I think everyone feels imposter syndrome at some point. I have talked to enough people from enough different backgrounds and at different stages in their career to understand that everybody feels that imposter syndrome. And it's just about who is talking about it and who's talking about it to you. Because like we said, if you don't have that relationship with your team and maybe that like grizzly senior developer who is like scaring you just by their existence, maybe they're like having some trouble and they're like trying to figure out some deadline and they're also feeling that imposter syndrome in their role, but you're not going to connect to them over that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like it can be very, very difficult to talk about these things and be vulnerable, especially with people that don't necessarily look like you.
Yeah, because you can feel siloed.
Exactly.
Yeah, you just feel alone in that. And like, I will get vulnerable for a second. Like, I felt like I was always chasing the moment that imposter syndrome would go away. When I do my first interview, then I won't feel like an imposter. When I get my first job, then I won't feel like an imposter. When I, finish onboarding, when I present a project, and it was always whenever I hit that milestone, it always felt like that goalpost moved even further back. And I think the thing that we have to acknowledge is maybe that feeling doesn't go away. So then what happens, right?
Yeah, I don't know that it goes away, but I do think that you have to get comfortable with feeling that discomfort. And you have to be able to be objective about what your actual shortcomings are. Because software engineering, it's a lifelong learning career.
Definitely.
So sometimes my blocker is just that I need to onboard onto this technology better, or I need to dig into the documentation better. And this is something that is solvable, but I need to put in the work to get there.
Yeah.
And other times it's just that loud and scary voice saying, you're not good enough and you will never get this. And I have to sometimes tell her, shut up, go back to sleep. We're going to get through this. It's going to be fine. And sometimes I need to be able to say, Kat, I don't know what I'm doing. And then you have to say,
you absolutely do. And you've done it before. And you've done so many things that you didn't know. And look.
Yeah, truthfully, a lot of our relationship as far as our support to each other in the tech space is one of us saying that we don't know something and the other one being like, you absolutely do. Like, we literally just talked about this. Or you literally just built this. So
imposter syndrome like wipes your brain.
Exactly. Imposter syndrome will steal your knowledge. It will suck it out of your brain and tuck it away somewhere. And you have to get someone else to retrieve it for you and put it back in. Yeah, I guess what we're saying is that community is the antidote for imposter syndrome.
Absolutely. And I think in addition to that, not just as software engineers, right, but as resilient people, you have to develop a tolerance for the discomfort of not knowing, of being unsure. And we talk about we have an unshakable faith and belief in ourselves because we have proof and evidence. And we have shown that every single time we have felt those feelings, we've been able to push through. And I think you made such a great point, right? Like that level 3 grizzled, older developer that seems like completely
sure of themselves.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm looking for, right? That level 3 developer that's so smart, so sure of themselves. They've been in the game for so long, right? They, in one way or another, are going to experience that imposter syndrome. And just because you are not having that conversation doesn't mean it's not going on, right? And the only difference between you maybe being at the beginning of your career or feeling unsure is that they have had to develop the tolerance to push past that feeling.
Definitely. I actually just thought of a quick anecdote.
Oh my gosh, tell me.
In my last software engineering role, there was some meeting and all of us on the team were listening to one of the developers use this like acronym and they were using it over and over and over.
Okay.
And I was sitting there panicking because I'm like, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. What is this acronym? And I finally put on my big girl pants and I said, excuse me, what does said acronym mean? And then everyone else chimed in and was like, yeah, I didn't know what that meant.
Oh my goodness.
And I was sitting there panicking for like a good amount of this meeting, being like, I'm the only idiot that doesn't know what's going on here. And literally like my entire team didn't know what this person was referring to. So sometimes imposter syndrome really is just that thing in your mind that's telling you that you're not good enough, and it does not exist. It does not exist.
And it's so funny because you felt like the imposter, but I think you were the smartest person in the room because you were the only one who was willing to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. And everybody in that room was pretending like they knew what that acronym meant.
Exactly. Yeah. I do think that there is some person that's maybe a little bit more seasoned that's like, I don't know what this means, but I know the resource to tell me what this means. And I think that's probably just the difference, right? Like that's the difference between the junior engineer and the senior
Yeah,
engineer.
probably.
Yeah.
That's so interesting though. How much better did you feel after you realized that you were not the only one?
Oh, I felt so good after that. But it doesn't mean that that cured imposter syndrome, right? Because I felt good in that moment. And obviously, it was impactful enough that I'm remembering it like, what, 2 years, 3 years later. And I can bring it up like, yeah, I was the one that clarified that. But that was one moment. And I just have to remind myself of those moments in the times that imposter syndrome's voice is a little bit louder.
It's so interesting because we've been talking about community. We've been talking about the power of community and visibility. And I feel like what I'm hearing in that anecdote is that you felt that relieve the stress and the anxiety of imposter syndrome just by seeing that you weren't the only one. It was almost like a proof to you. And I feel like this is you highlighted sort of our dynamic together. We are constantly supporting each other. And sometimes that just means being visible in our vulnerable moments and being in community together.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think really what we're trying to say is that with this podcast, we want you to be part of our community. We want you to hear other people being vulnerable, chatting code in the language that's accessible to them, talking trash when they're feeling like they're at their lowest, and seeing them be built up by their friends and by their community.
Totally.
Yeah, we just want you to feel like you're joining us for a coffee session. And whether that's talking tech or talking career, that's what we envision for the podcast.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't have said it better myself. The one thing I will say, this was like a really great way to sort of kick off what is the future for the podcast? Where did we come from? And what is our background and where are we going? And so we have so many cool things coming up, and 2025 is going to be such a big year. Yeah, it's going to be such a big year for the podcast. The one thing I will add is that we are going to take a brief break for the holidays. So we are not releasing an episode next Tuesday, which is Christmas Eve. I'll definitely be celebrating with my family. I think you will too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I will be in a cozy sweater and having my favorite snacks. But instead, we're going to be releasing an episode the following Tuesday, which is New Year's Eve.
Yeah, so ring in the new year with us for our first technical episode. We're going to be talking OOP. I'm excited to dig into some of our technical conversations. Join us if you are a technical person and you want to learn about some OOP, or I don't know, tune in if you're a non-technical person if you want to learn about some OOP.
It will still be fun, I promise.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and if you enjoyed our first episode, please give us a rating. It is especially important on platforms like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And definitely make sure that you subscribe because you do not want to miss any of these hot topic codes.
Yeah. And tell us about your career transition story if you are a career transitioner, or tell us about your story if you come from a traditional pathway. Really just tell us about yourself. We're building community here. So I want you to enjoy your holidays. I want you to have many cups of coffee, many cups of tea, maybe a hot chocolate in there.
Oh, for sure. I will.
Yeah, I definitely will. Until next time, keep sipping on that hot cup code. Bye.
Bye.